Hi, this is Andy Sutton, GM of Advanced Analytics at Endeavour Group in Australia, and you're listening to Experience in Data with Brian T. O'Neill.
You're now experiencing data with Brian O'Neill. Experiencing Data explores how product managers, analytics leaders, data scientists, and executives are looking at design and user experience as a way to make their custom enterprise data products and analytics applications more useful, usable, and valuable. And now, here's your host, the founder and principal of Designing for Analytics, Brian O'Neill.
Welcome back to Experiencing Data. This is Brian T. O'Neill. Today I have Andy Sutton on the line from down under from Australia. I feel like I'm introducing you at a show or something, but you run the advanced analytics at Endeavour Group, yes?
Yes.
What is that?
So we're a liquor and hospitality company. So I don't think there's really an equivalent in the US, but we run 1,500 bottle shops and about 350 pubs or hotels across the whole of Australia. So we're the biggest hospitality company in Australia, probably in the Southern Hemisphere, I would think.
Okay, got it. So both the buildings themselves as well as the products flowing through them and all of that?
Yeah, because in certain states in Australia, you need to have both. You need to have a physical kind of bar, and you need to be able to run a bottle shop or a liquor store, you need to have a physical bar as well. So a lot of our venues are kind of co-located pubs, accommodation, restaurants, and then kind of takeaway bottle shops as well.
Oh, I see. Got it. So you're a member of the data product leadership community, and you have a very interesting webinar coming up that I'm very excited to talk about. It's called Uncorking Customer Insights, How Data Products Revealed Hidden Gems in Liquor Retail. And it sounds like you discovered something. So I don't want you to give everything away here, but tell me a little bit about, I know you've been on this process of like adopting a more product orientation in the work that your team's doing. What was the before world like? Like, could you help paint that for listeners and then maybe tell us what the after or current one is, however you kind of think about it?
Yeah, I think there's probably two aspects to this. There's a before for Andy and there's a before for Endeavour as well. And they kind of came together at the same point. So let's do the before Andy first of all. So I'm a data geek. I've always been a data geek. I've got maths degrees which prove I'm a data geek, and I've got 20 odd years of being a data geek and doing data. Well, it wasn't really data science, it was data analyst, because data science didn't really exist when I was a kid or when I was younger. And so I've come on this kind of product discovery journey. And similarly, at the same time, we did an Endeavour. So we were a traditional functional analytics team with a BI team, with a data science team, with an analytics team. And depending on which of those teams you went to get an answer to a question, you'd get a very different answer. So you'd either get a dashboard or you get a piece of analytics or you get a data science model. And around about 3 years ago, we pivoted to a product-led approach. And that's given us huge steps forward in terms of the value we deliver. I guess is the main thing in terms of actually putting physical dollars, Australian dollars, obviously not American ones, into our tills through deploying analytics and data science and insights. So we've kind of flipped, I guess, like almost complete 90-degree flip from being function-led to being product-led. And that's across all of our initiatives, whether it's BAU kind of analytics, so ad hoc reporting analytics, through to big product builds. We've kind of flipped the whole model to that approach.
Where did that come from? Like, someone doesn't just wake up one day and says, I'm going to just switch everything to this product. Like, there is something happened. So tell us, like, what happened, or what was the triggering moment for you to change how your team was working? Like, what happened?
So yeah, all of it's easy in I guess in the post-rationalized world. But yeah, there was certainly some big steps along the way. The biggest one was we set up our digital function, which we call Endeavour X. And in that, we kind of went with what's almost traditional agile squads, the Spotify model. Is kind of what we deployed. And in a digital world, it kind of, I guess, is a bit more mature, right? And so you've probably seen this yourself, Brian. Like the digital world of agile squads and product-led development is a lot more mature than the data world. And in that space, we started executing or building personalization and personalization engine. And personalization is this really cool mix, really, of big data science problem to solve in terms of how you crunch all the data on your customers and products, and then a nice, pretty digital front end. And so we kind of started to think about, okay, well, how does that blend of analytics and design and product and software engineering, so I guess 4 legs of the traditional stool, how do those things blend together, and how do we create cross-functional teams that deliver in the personalization space? And personalization was really successful. And so we took that model and then started to go, okay, well, if we can deploy it in personalization, which is essentially a big data problem, how can we deploy it in other parts of the Endeavour value chain? So can we take the same approach and deploy it in our merchandising function when it comes to analytics, in our operations function, in finance, in people and culture, and all the other domains in our business? And around about 2022, my memory is shocking, but 2022, we started that with 4 squads solving 4 particular internal customer problems in merchandising operations. Again, that worked. So we had 4 squads chasing a promotions mission, a pricing mission, and a rostering mission. And I forgot what the other one was, another mission. And from there, kind of we grew out. So each of those missions started to deliver value. We kind of thought, oh, there's something here. We then brought our whole analytics team into that model and started to scale out. So we've now got 12 squads focusing purely on the back end kind of optimization within our business. And each of those squads is working in the kind of the product-y way. And I think that's really important, is like it's product-y rather than full product. So how do you build incrementally? How do you build with the customer in mind? How do you build cross-functional teams to deliver on missions? They're not all building nice, polished, shiny, customer-facing products. And I think it's the mindset that we've kind of stumbled upon rather than the specific actual way of working, if that makes sense. I can unpack that a little bit if you want to.
I think it's normal. It's kind of just like lowercase agile. Everybody has a flavor of it. No one's actually doing it the way it was written down. Everywhere I go, it's like, well, we have a modified Scrum that we use. It's like, yeah, that's your modified Scrum is normal because it's been modified and it's normal. If it's working, then do it, like do more of it. I'm curious though, was this mission to bring the digital together, was it kind of like, oh, we should also add the data team into this? Or you're like, no, we need to have an integrated thing, and you kind of drove that initiative, even though you were kind of attached to the data part? How did that go about?
Yes, so probably 2 steps on that as well. Like, to give some context, when I started Endeavour, we had about 4 analysts in the whole business. And as we focused on personalization, we started to build out what are the analytical needs we have to deliver personalization. So you need analysts, you need data scientists. Then you go, oh, I need engineers. Then you get, I need software engineers too, because I need to put this thing in the hands of users. And so we started to scale out quite organically in a way. Mm-hmm. And then COVID happened. So the whole world went analytics crazy. And we brought in a lot more analytical talent. And then I guess the big choice we made was to kind of pivot away from just customer-facing uses of data to the back end in terms of promotions pricing and those kind of algorithmic challenges. And that's when we said, well, okay, we need to get a bit more thoughtful and mindful about what's the role that analytics plays and how do you set up an analytics-heavy squad in comparison to a digital-heavy squad. So that was, I guess, the choice was about 2 years ago to go, okay, in a traditional digital squad, you're heavily reliant on software development and you probably have a few designers, then you've got all your scrum mechanics like a BA and a delivery lead and a product manager. In analytics worlds, the nature of some of the complexity means you're much more heavy in analytics, engineering, and data science. And you end up with bigger squads almost by default because of that. And that's the piece we're continually refining is what's the optimal size of a squad? How does that squad work together? How do you get data scientists, product people, and designers to work seamlessly together? So the same challenges you would have, I guess, in a digital agile world, but they tend to be magnified because you've got people coming from very different paradigms. It's a less mature way of working, especially between designers and analysts. And just the more people you put into a thing, whether it's a room or a squad or a team or whatever, the more interpersonal challenges you have to work through. So sure. It's pretty much the same kind of challenges, but just on a more magnified scale, let's say, or more. It's just more difficult because of the scale of the differences between people.
And just a quick tangent. You talked about personalization, which I assume that meant something to do with digital. Is there like a e-commerce arm of your business where you're selling products online and all of that, as well as the in-store, in-restaurant, in-bar experience or bottle shop experience?
That's a very good point. Yes. So we have a online business, 2 kind of core retail brands have both got online presence. One's the biggest online retailer in Australia, and one's the second biggest. So that gives you some idea of the scale. And personalization is focused on one of those brands where we have a large loyalty program. And so personalization was our successful attempt, if that's the right words, to kind of use that data to give customers the products that they want and connecting every customer with a drink they love. We set out to build the Spotify for wine. Can I say Spotify on there? I presume I can.
You could say anything you want.
Which, taking the whole personalization experience that Spotify deliver and bringing that into the world of wine. So how do you give people the right recommendations at the right time for the products they love? How do you do that across all of your channels and make it a seamless customer experience?
Yeah. Talk to me about the team, especially the team working under you. Did this require hiring different people, upskilling the current people? Is this a hard transition to make, an easy transition? Like, tell me about that whole process of adopting this method of working.
So was it easy? No. I'm very stubborn. You may have noticed in the DPLC stuff, right? I'm not short of an opinion or two.
You have passionate opinions.
There we go. That's a very good way of describing it. So it took a fair amount of blood, sweat, and tears really to bring our team on the journey in particular. So I'll come back to that in a minute, but the business actually were very supportive of the direction especially because we started to talk about here's the value we can unlock. An analytics team is delivering value to measurable, tangible value to organizations isn't that widespread. And so as soon as we started to talk about here's the value we can deliver if we pivot to this model, that kind of got the business and my boss in particular very interested. The harder part was bringing the team on the journey. And I'm trying to think back to when I was an analyst as well. What I really liked was the end-to-end accountability from understand a business problem, take a brief, turn it into an analytics brief, cut code, answer the question, write the presentation, deliver the presentation, and then drive the change and loop back around. But you kind of realize when you're trying to do that at scale, it's actually impossible because you need unicorns everywhere to be able to deliver on that, and you can't really scale it. So bringing the team on that journey was challenging, and to some degree, we're still on that journey. We're not done, and I don't think we ever will be. Did it require a different kind of person? Well, the biggest change was obviously we brought in product managers of various shapes, juniors, seniors, and heads of product to help us embed that kind of product way of thinking, but also made those roles accountable for the value delivery from the squad. So that was probably the biggest change, was to move from a world of, analytical teams were run by analytics managers to, well, we're going to build squads and you're going to bring in people, but we're going to deploy them into these squads and they'll be led day to day by the vision and the roadmap of the product manager. So that was the biggest change. And data product management isn't that mature worldwide, definitely isn't that mature in Australia. And that's the one I think we're still going on the journey of what makes a great data product manager. Is it somebody from a data background who learns how to do product? Is it someone from a product background who learns how to do data? Is it somewhere in between? Or is it none of those things and it's actually more about mindset than it is about the skill set they're coming with? And I think we're landing on the last one, that as long as somebody is open to growing either way, it's the growth mindset that actually matters for those roles. So that was the biggest change. And then also, I've got some fairly senior roles in my team. So, people who are that kind of head of level, running large teams of 70 to 100 people, and actually saying to them, well, you've got those resources. Your job is to hire them, retain them, develop them, grow them, but you don't get to tell them what to do every day because they're working in a squad which has got autonomy and they're being led by the vision of the product manager. And that's a hard one, even for me, but I've been doing this for 20 years and you're kind of used to, okay, you've got a question, you want it answered, you go and ask somebody, and now it goes into backlog and it might get done 3 weeks later if the product manager decides to prioritize it in a Scrum ceremony. So I think learning to let go is probably the biggest thing that some of the team have had to learn along the way too.
Got it. Was the resistance primarily from members on your team who wanted to run like the end-to-end thing, or did the other parts of the business find it hard to have data people involved there, or even running things if you're building like a personalization model and feeling like, that's a digital thing that should be run by the digital people, and you're like, no, that takes a lot of knowledge about data in order to do that, and it should be run by a data product manager. Tell me a little bit about those dynamics.
That one we haven't solved. This intersection of kind of customer and digital is still a work in progress. So what we've essentially done is anything customer facing, we've left in our digital part of the business. we give them or deploy, to give them, they pay for them, but we deploy our resources into their squads. So we build up the capability, but that part of the business decides what the mission is, the task delivery side of things. And so we then focus on anything back end. So in that case, personalization example is now led by digital product managers, but with blended squads. And some of those squad members are from the advanced analytics team. So we give them data scientists, we give them analysts, we give them engineers, and then they work out the best way to utilize those resources to deliver on their mission. And that has worked quite successfully as we get into problems which are kind of multi-domain and start to stretch across the organization. Things like, how do you optimize your supply chain? How do you optimize your store network, which has got a customer angle and a supply chain angle and a merchandising angle? Those things are going to be interesting to revisit because we're quite good at optimizing within a certain domain, but trying to optimize across our whole business is an interesting intellectual challenge for us, if nothing else. Like a number of businesses, we can be quite siloed in how we approach things. And so we end up being the connection and the glue and sometimes the referee between different parts of the business too.
How do you know this mindset and approach is working? How do they know it's working? Your other stakeholders or your C team, or like, what's their perception? How do they know?
So I think the biggest thing is the value we unlock in terms of incremental dollars, right? And so I've not worked in an analytics team before where we've been able to deliver measurable value to the bottom line in a way that we deliver more value than we cost as a cost center. So we're actually, in theory, we're becoming a profit center for the organization, not just a cost center. And so there's kind of one key metric. The second one, we do measure the voice of team and how engaged our team are, and that's on an upward trend since we moved to the new operating model too. So the team are kind of more engaged, despite a fairly tough transition into a new operating model, engaged and kind of on the bus, I guess, on that journey. We also measured internal kind of voice of partner score, and again, we get something like a 4.1 out of 5 on a scale. So we've got, I was going to say enthused internal partners. I'd say satisfied internal partners in terms of how we're operating. Those are probably the three biggest ones. So we're putting value in the till. We're delivering products, I guess, our internal team wants to use, and we are building an enthused team at the same time.
You talked about your team size started out at 4. I don't know if you're able to share any numbers or results, but like, how large is the team now? And you mentioned like we're profitable. Effectively, you're making more money for the business than it costs to run the advanced analytics team. Can you share any of the of those numbers with us, or even just ranges, just so people can get an idea?
Easier to share. The team size is about 150 now. So that's 150 deployed on the back end ones. There's another 50 deployed on the digital side. So about 200 in total. And that's a blend, right? So that's everything from BAs, designers, product managers through to data scientists and engineers. So not purely analytical resource, but that's the number of resources delivering on our missions. I think the key thing in terms of progress is we are supporting more parts of the business as we grow with more valuable use cases. So on kind of two axes, on one where we're doing more for more parts of the business, and the other one, every part of the business we're servicing, we are finding more valuable uses of data and analytics. So that's probably another proof point that we're doing something right, is we're kind of getting that cut through into other parts of the org that have not necessarily used analytics and anger in the past.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the product management. And you mentioned you have designers. When are designers involved? Is making these data products easy to use? Is that a challenge, or is that something the product managers typically can handle that work for, your internal facing stuff? I'm guessing you're not serving a lot of customer facing data products to the wine and liquor business and entertainment, but I don't know, maybe you are.
No, it's the reason that's a really, really interesting question is, and tell me if I'm wrong with it, normally starts with the paradigm that it is harder to fulfill the needs of external customers than to meet the needs of internal customers. And then our business is actually, it's kind of been in some ways the other way around. Like, you can put a product in front of an end customer and they will give you quality feedback you can then iterate on quickly. And sometimes you can put unfinished products in front of customers because customers are used to it. You do that with an internal team and you lose credibility, you lose cut through, you lose brownie points very quickly. And so actually sometimes internal teams hold their analytics colleagues to a higher standard than the external customer does. And so we are having to, in some respects, design products that are easy for internal customers to use. Some of the products we're building, I guess, we're trying to change not necessarily the culture of the organization, but definitely how people do their roles. And parts of their role, people feel very passionate about the roles they do and how they do them and the specific thing that they bring to that role. And we're trying to build some of that into products. So, well, actually, that decision you make would be better if you did it this way. And so that does require probably more design consideration than I'd anticipated, to be honest. And therefore, we're still bringing in more designers to help us on that journey. And it is moving progressively closer to the start line. So previously it's been, we built this product, now we should test it. I think now we're much more comfortable moving into the world of, okay, well, before we start, or at least when we're starting, we need to be getting a customer view at that point, and then designing with those internal stakeholders in mind. I think where it's a big challenge is say you've got 60 people in one of your functions trying to support. How do you not build a Frankenstein that tries to support the needs of all of those 60 users, but also build something that's bespoke enough to feel like it's not just something you're giving them out of the box? So there's this balance point between one size fits all and, well, I can't build 60 different versions of this thing. And so we're still kind of working through that. And every use case we do, we're learning more about what's the role that design plays in a data world. Adoption is by far the hardest part of building analytics products. I've found, like, over the last couple of years. Like, yes, it's not always easy to get alignment up front of what's the problem you're trying to solve, how much is it worth, whether you should build it, and all the internal political kind of conversations that go into that. Building it, okay, it's not easy to build data science models. I'm not going to say that, especially when I try and put them in a nicely packaged product. But it's also not rocket science. The third part, which is, I've got this amazing product that will change your world because it will make your job easier and it will make it easier for you to service the needs of your customers and deliver more value. Yeah, but I quite like my Google Sheet. That's the kind of the cognitive dissonance. And so that's the biggest challenge. How do you bridge that gap between, I've got this amazing thing, it'll make your job easier, but I don't want to use it? And that's, I think, where design and the product manager together play a really important role in helping bridge that adoption gap. And I guess the more of that you can do up front, so you understand what you're designing, what you're building for, or who you're building for, and what the blockers are going to be. I guess in some ways it's a traditional change management approach, but in some ways it's kind of harder than that because of the complexity of the kind of domains we're trying to solve for more than anything.
Mm-hmm. As a designer myself, I frame that less as change management and more of, I think it's natural for organizations that are actually evolving and progressing, and they're not just repeating yesterday over and over again. It's normal for the product and design staff to keep moving upstream. And eventually what you realize is what we need to be doing is customer research. We need to be exposed to the people that are going to use this stuff to understand how they do it now, such that we could make an improvement, that they would be willing to change something about their life or their workflow. They would be willing to use a new thing because we so understand what's challenging about their old way of doing it or the current way of doing it. It makes it easier to design a better solution when you really understand their problem, what the business is trying to do, and all of that. So it's a natural evolution. And I think that exposure time is where that's the gold. But the hard part is, to some in the business, if you're not writing code or manipulating data or putting pixels on a screen or whatever, it looks like nothing is happening. What can you show for going and listening to the salesperson complain about how it's too hard to sell this product because the prices are all different and every customer knows they're different, and like, what am I supposed to tell this guy? He's pissed because last week we told him it was this price and now it's this price. It's like, well, we need to understand that, because if we don't understand what it's like to be the salesperson, how are you possibly going to give him a tool that does pricing guidance if you don't really know what it's like to be the seller trying to convince this buyer to buy your wares or whatever it is that you're selling? That's my take, but tell me about that. Like, do you feel like that exposure time is really important? Like getting your product management and design or UX people upstream, is that like a critical thing for you?
So I would say it's undoubtedly, I would even go as far as say it's becoming critical in terms of the products we're building. I think there's a few aspects to that though. One is, if you're building a product, for instance, or you're building a set of products or a process for an operations team. So in our context, an operations team can mean a team of people who run a pub. Right? So it's not just necessarily about convincing me or my product managers or my data scientists that you need research. It's we want to take some of the resources out of running that bar for a period of time because we want to spend time with them watching, understanding, and researching. So those are kind of more of the challenges I think we kind of face. Again, we're facing into that and doing that, but so it's not necessarily about even convincing us that it's a good idea. It's about convincing the wider business. I think what we've got though from the fact we've kind of almost, I'm going to say bootstrapped or ground our way to the success we've got today, it does give us more options when you can say, okay, well, this exact activity might not be seen to deliver value today, but let's take the context here of what we're building as a function and a capability, which is we've got runs on the board. We're starting to knock the ball around the park. We want to start smashing sixes. This is a cricket reference, by the way, for anybody in the US. And if you want to start hitting sixes, you have to kind of play yourself in. And part of playing yourself in is spending time designing things up front and spending time with your internal stakeholders. And you can't accelerate if you haven't done that kind of playing yourself into the wicket. There are lots of things that we do now in terms of design, but also in terms of how we structure a squad, in terms of how we sequence things that we couldn't have done at the start because people would have thought we were a little bit bonkers. And so, number one, we've learned some of these things along the way, but also the success we've had to this point means you get more freedom, I guess, to be able to say, well, actually, to do this thing properly, we need to do this. Okay, we've earned the trust, we've earned that kind of the seat at the table, and so we kind of have those conversations. But it's still not trivial to get people to say, oh yeah, I'll give you a day-long workshop, or I'll give you my team off of running a restaurant and a bar for the day so they can spend time with you, so you can understand our processes. But it's critically important.
I don't know if you're allowed to tell us about this, but is there a specific example of a data product you're working on or that's already in production that would involve like the bar staff, for example? Like, help give us a picture of, because someone listening may be like, well, why does the barman need data? Like, there's a gap here. Fill it in for me, Andy. Like, what's happening there? Why would the data team need to talk to the barman at the pub?
So there's a use case that we're building at the moment, which is around pricing. Let's call it approach rather than optimization in our hotel. So we've got 350 pubs around all of Australia, and Australia's a pretty big place, right? And so lots of variation in terms of demographics. You've got some of our pubs which are in our city centres, and some of them which are thousands of kilometres away in the middle of nowhere. And so when you're trying to optimize or suggest how do you price, and this is going to sound like a foreign language to most of the US, but how do you price a schooner versus a midi versus a pint versus a jug of beer, for instance, right? So they're the various different sizes you can get. What's the relative pricing between those things? Like, that's a fairly complex problem to solve when you've got 350 different venues scattered across the whole country. And I think what is very particular to pubs is the importance of the interaction between, especially a local pub. So, right, the importance of the interaction between the person who is the customer and the person serving the customer, right? And so what you don't get from the data is a sense of Jim or Bob or Sue who comes into the pub every day or every other day, and what's the impact of whatever you're doing on them. And some of our bar teams are, I guess, yes, they're there to serve a drink or to serve a meal, but pubs are also very relationship-driven places, right? And they're about connections between the staff and the customer. And you don't get any of that, I think, in terms of your understanding if you're just looking at things from a pure data perspective. And so that's one of the use cases. The other one we're looking at is how do you use the activity that happens in a bar and if you can predict the amount of work that happens in a hotel, so that's the number of meals you serve, the number of pints you serve, the number of drinks you serve, the number of customers you serve, then you can get better at matching your staffing roster to your demand in a pub as well. But again, that massively underplays if somebody comes in and you're spending 3 hours of your day having a conversation with them because that's what they need from you as the customer and staff relationship. You don't get any of that if you're just looking purely at data either, because you see a transaction go through a till. You don't see the the conversation that happens off the back of that. So therefore, how do you capture some of that in your product as well? So it's about understanding the context of the data, not just the data itself, I guess is probably the easiest way to describe it. Do those use cases make sense?
It totally does. So you're in that case, we're talking about how do I help the manager at this restaurant or whoever the person is that either writes the prices on the chalkboard or prints the next menu for the next month to know what the pricing should be. And as the saying goes, that the map is not the territory, right? And I love how you frame this about if you just look at this as a mathematical problem, you can probably optimize the pricing in the short term, but it would not account for the damage that you would do to, say, a small community where the public house, the public house is like a center of the community, and there's relationships there, and probably families go there or whatever. It's a center of that community. It's not just a place to get beer. And so what is the cost of like sucking every last dollar out of every customer that you can get? Well, long term, that's not good for Endeavour Group or anybody, but the data will never tell you that. And so, for listeners on this show, when I talk about human-centered design and downstream stakeholders, it is June and John that come in on Sunday afternoon at 4:00. They're a downstream stakeholder, as they're the ones that pay for this. They're the customer that pays for this thing. The internal customer is the barman who's setting the prices, and there's a relationship there. And if we never have any exposure to any of that, then it's just a math problem. But you're not going to create long-term value there because you're not factoring in like, well, how important is pricing in this community? Well, maybe this is a community that doesn't have as much money, so we stay on the lower side because longer term that we're going to have customers for a longer period, and the math won't tell you, the database will never tell you about the color of the community in that sense. And I think overall, it's still actually net better for the business, right? Because you're factoring these long-term perspectives, not just the short-term. Did we build a pricing algorithm and did it maximum? Oh, look what it did in September. It's up 25%. It's like, yeah, but what did you do for the next year to the relationships of those people long-term? You don't know. You got to wait now. And by the time you've done the damage, it's like, well, just lowering the prices isn't necessarily going to bring them back if they just, if you've burned those bridges. So tell me if I'm wrong. That's how I kind of see that. Like,
no, that's completely accurate, I think, portrayal. And like, you don't have to look too far to see examples in different industries where that's gone askew, for want of a better word. I think the thing I really love about working for Endeavour is that it is a business that it's a story and relationship business. So every winery has got a story. Every wine grower has got a story. Every wine's got a story. And therefore, these kind of conversations are almost natural in our business. So like, I'm a data guy, right? Like, so storytelling, connections, relationships isn't really my forte. But in the business we work in, it becomes much easier because that is the business, right? Like our CEO started work on the shop floor in one of our stores 30 years ago, right? And that kind of then relationship stuff percolates to the organization. So having these conversations around customer and internal stakeholders in the context of data feels a lot easier in some ways in our business, because storytelling and relationships is the way we get things done, where business is all about sociability as well. And therefore that comes through. And I think that it's probably the missing part from the piece earlier on about why you go on this journey. Well, in our business, we kind of go on the journey because it almost feels natural to go on this journey, right? Like, because bringing together the storytelling side of our business, the relationship side of our business, and data, those two things together is what really matters. That might sound a little bit airy-fairy, but like, it's much easier to do this producty thing in a world where people want to talk to each other, right? They don't want to have this separate data team that's just doing ivory tower type stuff that you can have in some orgs. It wants to, and we want to connect with the broader organization and that kind of rich tapestry of different people across the business. And yeah, we get, as an analytics team, get frustrated with people who can't understand data or can't understand analytics, but I guess it's our job to help bridge that gap, bridge that divide. Yeah, so I think the context of the org makes some of this stuff simpler, but also potentially more important.
I mean, it's messy, right? If you're building stuff that involves people, it's messy by definition, and the data might suggest things are orderly and structured and categorized and neat, even though the data itself could be a mess sometimes. But that's not the actual world when it comes to putting these products and services in front of someone that actually has to use them and make a decision on it. It's a whole different story. Is there anything you would change? Like, this has been a great conversation, Andy. I really appreciate you being so candid here. Is there anything you would change if you rewound back to 2022 and had a chance to kind of replay this transformation? I know you said, like, we had to earn some trust. We had to have some wins before we could do some crazy stuff like talking to customers and some of that. But like, is there anything you would change if you went into like a new organization and kind of was like similar to this one where it was a few years ago? How would your playbook look different?
So because of the nature of the egos involved in a way, mine and somebody who's working with me, we went for, what are the really hard things we could go after? And we went for, what are the top 5 hardest things we could do? We're going to go after those things. And there were a load of reasons why in terms of the context of the organization, but that meant that getting the runs on the board initially was tough, right? Because we were going, they're the hardest things algorithmically, and they're also the hardest things from a people change perspective. Oh, why don't we do those things? Having a more blended approach might have been better for my overall well-being. But I guess what that's also meant is, every time we've hit a bump in the road, hasn't necessarily always mattered because the value has still been there. So the good thing about tackling hard things is that there's lots of value in them. And so even when you're not quite where you wanted to be, you're still delivering value. Whereas if you're doing the easy things that have only got marginal value anyway, if you go off track, much harder to say, okay, I'm still delivering measurable value. But having a more blended portfolio would probably be the first thing I would do differently. And I think this is probably something I'm saying because I'm being interviewed by a designer, but I think we would probably have been better off getting more pointed around design as a capability in data sooner. But it's also slightly rewriting time because the conversation we're having around data product leadership, and what's design's role in that, wasn't being talked about in my world 2 years ago. So I'm slightly trying to accelerate time and get that talked about 2 years earlier. But if we'd have been going into some of these things with more of a view of what does our customer want and need, our internal customer want and need, we would probably have got to where we are quicker.
Yeah.
We talk about our strategy for next year, and we have just iterated our strategy, but we've left a lot of it the same because we say we're doing a lot more right than we're doing wrong. And so there are things where, yes, we could tweak and do things in a slightly different way, but I wouldn't change a lot of it because it's been really successful. But yeah, I think not biting off more than we can chew, getting a more blended portfolio would probably be the biggest thing that most of my team would say, not just me.
Yeah. Andy, this has been great. Tell us quickly, what are people that are going to go to the webinar going to learn more about? So it's called, again, Uncorking Customer Insights, How Data Products Revealed Hidden Gems in Liquor Retail. Are you going to go behind the scenes, like some case study here on some of these data products, or what's that going to look like?
So I'll definitely do some more of this scene set stuff, just in terms of some of the things we found along the way and some of the where we fell on our face, because this is all a great post-rationalized conversation. Like, there were definitely areas where it was like ups and downs along the way. But yeah, I'll talk a bit more about some of the products we're building and some of the problems we're solving, some of the kind of specific adoption challenges we faced along the way too. Because it's easy on an hour-long podcast to tell the whole rosy story, but there's definitely some bumps in the road and some cracks that we've kind of experienced too. So yeah, I'll show a bit more of the secrets and what's behind the curtain, I guess.
Excellent. I can't wait to check that out. I wanted to give you the last word. Any closing thoughts or advice for people, other leaders that are kind of in your shoes, maybe on this journey right now?
I think the key thing for me is just keep putting one foot in front of the other and keeping going. It's very easy to go off the path or be told that the product approach or the design approach or whatever else is not the right way of doing things. There's a fair few naysayers, right? And so for us, it's just been keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep grinding out the results, keep doing that incrementally, keep learning along the way. Kind of in some respects, all the things the Agile Manifesto says you should do, right? Which is, deliver incrementally. Value is more important than process. And actually, but keeping going, I think, is the thing that is probably the biggest thing nobody tells you is you need to be fairly resilient and just keep going. So that's been the biggest thing for us is keep going. And then I think the other one is find your tribe. So I think the really positive thing that I found about the data product leadership community, but also other people across Australia who are doing this kind of thing, is just finding people who think in a similar way. It's not exactly the same because that's boring if you don't get to check and challenge each other. But find the people who are also trying to do this weird and wacky thing build relationships, network, share stories, and learn from each other too. So those are probably my two parting words of wisdom for what they're worth. So.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I've enjoyed your contributions in the community, and thanks for sharing all this today. Where can someone who's not in the community, how can they get in touch with you? Is LinkedIn, or where do you hang out anywhere publicly online?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to get hold of me. So there aren't many Andy Suttons on LinkedIn, but Andy Sutton Endeavour Group is by far the easiest way to get hold of me. Yeah, and look forward to continuing the conversation with anybody who wants to.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being so candid and transparent here about your journey. It's been great to chat.
Thanks, Brian.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Experiencing Data with Brian O'Neill. If you did enjoy it, please consider sharing it with the hashtag #ExperiencingData. To get future podcast updates or to subscribe to Brian's mailing list, where he shares his insights on designing valuable enterprise data products and applications, visit designingforanalytics.com/podcast.